Life in our little house nestled in the suburbs was like a scene from a quaint storybook. I, Emma, was the wife to a wonderful man named Jack and mother to our energetic son, Michael. Our world was small, but it was filled with immense love and laughter, making every moment a treasure. Jack was a man of simple joys. He loved gardening, and his laughter was infectious. He had a way of making even the dullest days seem bright. Michael, with his boundless energy and curiosity, was the apple of our eyes, always up to some mischief. Our days often began with the sweet aroma of pancakes, Jack's specialty. Best way to start the day, Emma, he'd say, flipping a pancake perfectly in the air, much to Michael's delight. Watch and learn, Michael. Your dad is the pancake king, I'd chime in, my heart swelling with pride and love. Michael would try to imitate his dad, his little hands clumsily working the spatula, his face a picture of concentration. One day, I'll be just like Dad, he'd proclaim, and Jack would ruffle his hair, saying, "You'll be even better, champ." The garden was Jack's sanctuary, and he spent countless hours tending to it. The flowers seemed to bloom just to make him happy. On weekends, Michael and I would join him, each of us tending to our little patches. "A family that gardens together stays together," Jack would say with a wink. Our evenings were often spent in the living room, with Jack strumming his guitar, filling the house with melodies. I would often join in with my slightly off-key singing, and Michael would dance around, laughing and clapping and clapping. "Encore, Dad! Encore!" he would cheer, and Jack would oblige with another song. Holidays were especially magical. Christmas was a grand affair, with Jack dressing up as Santa, much to Michael's amusement. "Ho, ho! What does my little elf want for Christmas?" Jack would bellow in his best Santa impersonation. "I want 1,000,000 candies and a spaceship," Michael would shout, jumping into Jack's arms. "All right, Santa's workshop will have to work overtime," Jack would laugh, his eyes twinkling with the same excitement as our son's. Our life was simple, yet it was filled with moments that I wished could last forever. But life has a way of reminding us that nothing is permanent. Those days of joy and laughter, the sounds of music and mirth, the warmth of love and companionship, were the treasures I held close as we faced the tides of change. Little did I know that those cherished moments would soon become memories, etched in my heart as a reminder of a past filled with love and happiness. The vibrant colors of our life began to fade one winter, the days grew shorter, and so did our moments of joy. Jack, my beloved husband, was taken from us suddenly, leaving behind a void that seemed impossible to fill. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now echoed with the silence of our loss. The night Jack passed away, the world outside was covered in a blanket of snow, as if nature itself was mourning with us. I remember holding Michael close as we sat on the couch, lost in our grief. "Mom, is Dad really gone?" Michael's voice was small, trembling with the weight of his young world crumbling. I wrapped my arms around him, feeling the tears welling up in my eyes. "Yes, honey," I whispered, trying to stay strong for him. "But he will always be with us in our hearts and memories." "But I need him here, Mom! I miss him so much," Michael sobbed, his words muffled against my shoulder. I know, I murmured, my heart breaking for both of us. "We both do." The days that followed were a blur of condolences, sympathy, and the overwhelming reality of our loss. I tried to put on a brave face for Michael, but at night, when he was asleep, I'd allow myself to break down. The loneliness was suffocating, like a constant shadow that followed me around. One evening, as I was tucking Michael into bed, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes. "Mom, will Dad ever come back?" he asked, a hopeful note in his voice. I sat beside him, taking his hand in mine. "No, honey," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But he's watching over us, proud of his brave little boy." "I wish I could talk to him just one more time," Michael said, his voice quivering. "Me too, Michael. Me too," I replied, holding back my tears. In the wake of Jack's passing, I found solace in my work. I threw myself into my business, using it as an escape from the emptiness that filled our home. To my surprise, my dedication paid off. The business began to thrive, growing beyond what I had ever imagined, but the success felt hollow without Jack to share it with. "Mom, you're always working," Michael observed one day as I was buried in paperwork. "I know, honey," I replied, looking up from my desk. "It keeps me busy, helps me not to miss your dad so much." "Do you think Dad would be proud of you?" he asked, his eyes curious. "I hope so," I said, managing a small smile. "I'm doing this for us, for our future." But deep down, I knew that no amount of success or wealth could fill the void Jack had left in our hearts. I was a successful businesswoman, but at the end of the day, I was just a widow and a single mother trying to find her way in a world that had suddenly turned cold and unfamiliar. Time, as it inevitably does, moved forward, carrying us along with it. The sharp edges of our grief dulled, leaving behind a lingering ache. Michael grew into a fine young man, his father's image in many ways. His laughter, once a rare sound in the house, began to fill the rooms again. It was during this time of healing that Michael brought Sarah into our lives. I remember the day he introduced her. He had a sparkle in his eye, the kind that hadn't been there since his father's passing. "Mom, this is Sarah," he said, his voice tinged with excitement and nervousness. Sarah was strikingly beautiful, with a smile that seemed to light up the room. "It's so lovely to meet you, Mrs. Anderson," she said, her voice sweet and melodic. "Please, call me Emma," I replied, smiling back. "I've heard so much about you." As days turned into weeks, Sarah became a regular fixture in our home. Michael was clearly smitten, and I was happy to see him so in love. But as I got to know Sarah better, a nagging feeling began to take root in my heart. One afternoon, as I was preparing tea in the kitchen, I overheard a conversation between them that gave me pause. "Your mom seems nice, but a bit old-fashioned, don't you think?" Sarah's voice carried a hint of disdain. Michael hesitated before replying. "She's just from a different time, Sarah. She means well." The remark stung, but I brushed it off, attributing it to generational differences. However, as time passed, Sarah's true nature began to reveal itself. Her sweet facade would slip, revealing a more callous and mocking demeanor, especially towards me. One evening, while clearing the dinner table, Sarah's words cut through the air. "Honestly, Emma, it's like living with a pensioner. You really should try to keep up with the times." I felt a lump in my throat, but I forced a smile. "I guess I'm just set in my ways, Sarah." Michael, to my dismay, remained silent, his gaze fixed on his plate. It was then that I realized my son was blinded by love, unable or unwilling to see the disrespect aimed at me. As their relationship progressed, so did their plans for the future. The day Michael announced their engagement, my heart sank even as I mustered a congratulatory smile. "Mom, we're getting married!" Michael exclaimed, his eyes shining with happiness. "That's wonderful news, Michael," I replied, trying to sound enthusiastic. But deep down, I harbored reservations. I feared that Sarah's disdainful attitude and mocking remarks were red flags that Michael failed to see. Yet, out of love for my son, I kept my concerns to myself, hoping against hope that I was wrong about Sarah. In the privacy of my room, I often pondered the situation. "Jack, what would you do?" I'd whisper into the silence, longing for his guidance. But the answers never came, and I was left to navigate this new chapter on my own, filled with apprehension about what lay ahead. The engagement of Michael and Sarah marked the beginning of a challenging chapter in our lives. As their wedding plans unfolded, Sarah's true colors became increasingly evident, and the tension in our household grew. One evening, as we were discussing wedding arrangements, Sarah's sharp tongue made an unwelcome appearance. "Honestly, Emma, these ideas of yours are so dated. It's our wedding, not a trip down memory lane," she said, her words dripping with condescension. I tried to keep my composure, reminding myself that it was their special day. "Of course, Sarah, it's just a suggestion. It's important that you both have the wedding you want," I replied, forcing a smile. Michael, caught between us, offered a weak, "Mom's just trying to help Sarah." Her eyes rolled in response, a silent but clear dismissal of both my suggestions and my role in their lives. The more time I spent around Sarah, the more her disdain for me became apparent. Her comments, initially veiled and subtle, grew bolder and more hurtful. One afternoon, while Michael was out, Sarah visited. I thought it a good opportunity to bond, but instead, I found myself subjected to her cruelty. "You really are a pathetic pensioner, aren't you, Emma?" she sneered, examining the family photos on the mantel. "Stuck in your old ways, living in the past." I felt a pang of hurt, but my concern for Michael's happiness held my tongue. "Sarah, I don't think it's fair to—" "Fair?" she cut me off. "What's fair is that Michael finally has a chance to experience life without being smothered by his mother." Her words stung like a slap. I was taken aback, not just by the cruelty of her words, but by the realization that my son had chosen someone who could harbor such malice. I tried to voice my concerns to Michael. "Michael, I'm worried about how Sarah treats me. It's not just about differing opinions anymore. She's disrespectful, I said one evening, hoping he would understand. Mom, you're overreacting. Sarah is just stressed with the wedding. It'll get better. You'll see, he replied, his tone dismissive. His unwillingness to see the truth deeply saddened me. I felt isolated in my own home, a place that once held so much joy and laughter. Despite my success in business, with my company now valued at over $300 million, Sarah's demeaning attitude made me feel small and insignificant. I never flaunted my wealth, believing in a humble lifestyle, but Sarah's ignorance of my financial status seemed to embolden her contempt towards me. As the wedding day approached, the atmosphere in our home grew heavier. I longed for the days when Jack was still with us, when happiness was not a rare visitor in our lives. One quiet evening, as I sat in Jack's old armchair, I whispered to his memory, "Jack, I'm lost. I don't know how to protect our son from this. I don't know how to make him see the truth." But the room remained silent, offering no answers, no comfort. I was alone in this struggle, trying to navigate the rising tensions and protect my son from a future that I feared would be filled with regret. The day of Michael and Sarah's wedding arrived with a mix of emotions swirling within me. Despite my reservations about Sarah, I wanted nothing more than for Michael to be happy. The wedding itself was a grand affair, reflecting more of Sarah's tastes than Michael's. As I watched the ceremony unfold, a part of me ached, missing Jack more than ever and wishing he could have been there to see our son getting married. During the reception, Sarah's behavior took a turn for the worse. She seemed to revel in belittling me, especially in front of her friends and family. "Look at Emma, trying so hard to fit in. It's almost cute how out of place she looks," she said loudly to a group of her friends, her voice dripping with mockery. I felt a flush of embarrassment, but I held my head high, refusing to let her see how her words affected me. Michael, busy entertaining guests, seemed oblivious to his wife's behavior. As the evening wore on, the comments continued. At one point, Sarah approached me with a glass of wine in her hand. "Here, Emma, drink up. It might make you feel younger," she sneered, her eyes cold. I accepted the glass, replying with as much grace as I could muster. "Thank you, Sarah. It's a lovely celebration." After the wedding, Michael and Sarah moved into Sarah's family home, a lavish estate that dwarfed our modest house. I visited them occasionally, hoping to maintain a relationship with my son, but each visit left me more disheartened. I began to notice a change in Michael. The light in his eyes dimmed, and he seemed constantly on edge, especially around Sarah. It was during one of these visits that I overheard an argument between them. "You need to do more, Michael! You can't just sit around and expect me to do everything!" Sarah yelled, her voice sharp and accusing. "Sarah, I'm trying. I've been working late every day this week," Michael replied, his voice wary. "Trying isn't good enough. You need to step up, or I'll find someone who will," she threatened, her words like daggers. Hearing this, my heart broke for Michael. He was trapped in a marriage with someone who didn't appreciate or respect him. I decided to confront him about it after Sarah had left the room. "Michael, you don't seem happy. This isn't the life you deserve," I said, my voice heavy with concern. "Mom, it's not as bad as it looks. We're just going through a rough patch," he replied, avoiding my gaze. "But she's hurting you emotionally, Michael. You need to consider your own well-being," I urged him, desperate for him to see the truth. "Mom, I can handle it. It's just how Sarah is. She doesn't mean it," he said, his voice laced with a resignation that pained me deeply. As I left their house that day, a sense of helplessness engulfed me. I could see the path my son was on, yet I felt powerless to change it. The joy and hope I once held for Michael's future were being eroded by the harsh reality of his present. The aftermath of the wedding was not a beginning of a new chapter for Michael and Sarah. It was the start of a troubling period that I feared would only worsen with time. The months following the wedding felt like a slow, painful descent. My visits to Michael and Sarah's home became a window into a world I wished my son wasn't a part of. Sarah's behavior towards both of us, especially me, grew increasingly hostile, while Michael seemed to wither under the constant barrage of her criticism. One fateful afternoon, I stopped by their house unannounced. The moment I stepped in, I could feel the tension. Michael looked tired, his eyes lacking the spark they once held. Sarah, on seeing me, didn't bother to hide her disdain. "What are you doing here, Emma?" Sarah's voice was cold, unwelcoming. "I just wanted to see how you both were doing," I replied, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. As we sat at the dinner table, the air was thick with unspoken words. Michael seemed nervous, constantly glancing at Sarah as if seeking approval. It was then that Sarah turned her venomous words towards me. You really are a beggarly old retired woman, aren't you, Emma? She sneered. Why don't you just stay away from us? We don't need your pity visits. Michael, who I had hoped would stand up for me, remained silent, his head bowed. That silence was more painful than any of Sarah's words. It was a betrayal, a clear indication that he had chosen Sarah's side over mine. I stood up, my hands trembling, not with anger, but with a deep sense of hurt. Michael, how can you let her speak to me like this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom, it's complicated, he stammered, not meeting my eyes. No, it's not complicated. It's about respect, something your wife clearly lacks, I said, my voice growing stronger with conviction. Emma, just leave. You're not welcome here, Sarah interjected, her eyes gleaming with malice. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something, anything, but his silence spoke volumes. With a heavy heart, I walked out of their house, realizing that I had lost my son not just to Sarah, but to his own inability to stand up for what was right. That night, back at home, I made a decision. It was one of the hardest choices I had ever made, but it was necessary for my own well-being. I blocked their numbers and vowed to stop all financial support. I needed to distance myself from the toxicity that had engulfed Michael and Sarah's life. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I whispered into the darkness, Jack, I tried. I tried to be there for our son, but I can't watch him destroy himself. The silence that followed was my only answer, a stark reminder of my solitude in this battle. Cutting ties with Michael was like losing a part of myself, but I knew it was the only way. The final straw had broken, not just my tolerance for Sarah's behavior, but the bond I thought was unbreakable between a mother and her son. The month following my decision to sever ties with Michael was a period of profound introspection and sorrow. The house, once filled with the sounds of a happy family, now echoed with the silence of my solitude. I would often find myself gazing at old photographs, reminiscing about the times when Jack was still with us and Michael was just a boy, full of innocence and joy. One evening, as I sat in a living room, lost in thought, the phone rang, breaking the silence. I glanced at the caller ID and saw Michael's number. For a moment, I hesitated, my heart racing. Reluctantly, I answered. Mom, it's me. Michael's voice came through, sounding small and broken. Michael, I replied, my voice steady but filled with a mix of emotions. What's wrong? Everything, Mom. Sarah, she's leaving me. We've run out of money, and she says she can't be with someone who can't provide for her, he confessed, his voice cracking. I felt a pang of sympathy, but it was quickly overshadowed by a sense of vindication. Michael, I warned you about her. You chose not to listen, not to protect me from her insults. And now, you're seeing her true colors. I said, my words laced with both concern and frustration. I know, Mom. I'm sorry. I was blind, but I need your help now. Can you lend me some money? He asked, his voice desperate. The request stung. After all the pain and betrayal, he was reaching out, not for reconciliation, but for financial help. Michael, you need to stand on your own 2 feet. You chose this path. I can't bail you out every time you face a problem, I replied, my resolve firm. But, Mom, I have nowhere else to turn. I thought you would understand. I thought family meant something, he pleaded. Family does mean something, Michael, but it also means respecting and supporting each other, which you failed to do, I answered, my heart heavy. Please, Mom, I'm sorry. I really am, he said, the desperation in his voice palpable. Michael, I love you, but I can't support this cycle of dependency and disrespect. It's time for you to learn from your mistakes and grow, I said, the finality in my voice marking the end of our conversation. As I hung up the phone, a myriad of emotions washed over me. There was relief for standing up for myself, there was sadness for the strained relationship with my son, and there was hope that this tough love would eventually lead Michael to a better path. That night, as I lay in bed, I spoke to Jack's memory again. I did what I had to do, Jack, for our son's sake, for my own sake. The journey ahead was uncertain, and I knew that the road to healing and reconciliation would be long and arduous. But for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I had taken a stand not just for my dignity, but also for the hope that one day, Michael would understand and appreciate the tough choices made out of love. This was the turning point, not just for me, but for the possibility of a new beginning, one where respect and love would once again be the foundation of our family.